welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So I've kind of been on an intermittent schedule these days. My life is getting very busy. This is not my full-time job, obviously. I wish it was. I have a few other jobs that I'm doing at the same time now, so I'm going to try and keep it to probably one a week if I can. If not, maybe even once every 2 weeks. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about the box office, so I'm going to try and keep doing it as much as I can. But sometimes life gets in the way. So without further ado, let's talk about what happened over this holiday weekend. It is President's Day tomorrow. So let's review the top 10 at the box office for February 17th through the 19th. We're just getting in early estimates from this afternoon. So these aren't the actuals, but they're going to be very, very close, within 5 to 10%, probably even closer than that, within like 1%, to be honest with you. They're usually very good with these. In any event, so number one this weekend at the box office is going to be Lego Batman movie. And so it came in at $34.2 million for the weekend. It's a 35% drop for that film, which is pretty darn good. Anything in general, right? Anything under 50 in the 40s is pretty good for a second weekend. When you get under that 40% line, that's fantastic. Now, that being said, Lego Batman is a children's movie, and they tend to have smaller drops than, say, a drama or something that has a huge drop would be like a horror film. So on average, they have smaller drops from weekend to weekend, especially the first few weekends. So I think Warner Brothers is going to be super happy with that 35% drop. Its total take so far is just shy of 100 million. It's at 98.7 million. It should get over the $100 million mark, obviously, by the end of the holiday weekend. It's still on a ton of screens. It's almost on 4,100 screens. I think, that's super saturated. The overall performance here is good. I had a show I didn't actually record. I did all the projections for its opening weekend, and I'm trying to remember what the hell. I'm going to look back at my piece of paper over here. Oh, man, I did all these great projections, and I didn't get to record an episode for it. I had projected that Batman would do about $77 million its opening weekend. I can't remember why. There was a lot of hype with it. The original movie did, I want to say, in the high 60s. I was off by like $22 million at least. No, I was off by like $24 million. It only opened at $53 million last weekend, with about a $13,000 per theater average, which is pretty darn good. But at the same time, I feel like it just underperformed from where they wanted it to be. Again, this is a February opening. The Lego movie did this in the 60s, I think high 60s when it opened. So it kind of feels a little underwhelming overall. I thought the buzz on this movie was off the charts, so that's why I picked it to go in the high 70s, mid to high 70s for its opening weekend. It's just not going to get there. Is it going to make it? I think the big question now with the box office nerds is Lego Batman going to make it to the $200 million mark domestically? I think it will, just because it has, a very high rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I got to check out and remember what it was here. But people seem to really love it. I think at the end of the day, it's a children's film, and they tend to just play forever. And I don't think there's a big competition coming up for it. 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, 86% audience score. You're thinking the multiple on this, the multiplier of its opening weekend is going to be well over 3. So it's going to easily break the 150, 160, 170 mark. The question is, what would be the multiplier for it to get to 200? 200 divided by 53 for your arithmetic nerds. Is that arithmetic? Does that count as arithmetic? Basic multiplication? I guess it does. So it would need a 3.77 multiplier. That's kind of high, but I think with the high quality of the film and the positive reaction to it, I think it's going to get to the $200 million mark, but we'll keep an eye on that one. So Lego Batman movie, great drop this weekend, only 35%, continuing to do well. A little bit underwhelming for what Warner Brothers really wanted out of it, but it's doing good enough. Coming at number 2 this weekend was 50 Shades Darker, with a surprisingly, so it's a 55% drop drop, right? You're thinking, oh, that's terrible. Like, that's not good. Yeah, like anything, you know, and around that range for a normal film, you're like, oh, that's not good. Like, the word of mouth was bad. The quality of the film was just not good. Didn't connect with audiences. But when you compare the 50 Shades Darker drop to the original film, which came out last year, I believe the drop was 79%. I have to double check on that to make sure that that's true. But the drop on this first film was outrageous. Yeah, well, it was 73%, so whatever, close. That's awful. Like, that's just really, really bad. Now, there's a couple things you gotta think about here, right? Why would it drop that much? Sure, it wasn't that good of a film, and I think most people would say that. I've seen it a couple of times. It's always been on pay cable. I've never read the books, had never interested in reading the books. I think from a kind of an outsider's perspective, for someone who watches a lot of films, and I'm not like that judgy about what I'll call middle-brow entertainment. This was a movie and a book for people who are not cosmopolitan. I'll put it that way. They don't live in San Francisco. They don't live in New York City. They didn't go to Dubai last year. They're just not like that type of person who travels a ton, who's like an internationalist or a globalist, as the dirty term is these days, for someone who's intelligent, I guess. Anyways, I'm not going to go down that road. 50 Shades of Grey was meant for places like Omaha, San Antonio, where I'm from in Milwaukee, kind of middle America. That's where the book really popped off. And so this movie did really well in those areas. So it connected on that level, I think, with those people. But the quality of the film, from what I saw from an outsider's perspective, was terrible. The chemistry was awful. Both the leads were awful. They clearly didn't want to be in the movie when you saw the pressers. The guy, I don't know his name. What the hell is his name? He's not American, is he? He's Jamie Doran. Wait a second. Is he American? I feel like he's not American. I'll have to look this up now. Dakota Johnson's just a travesty in this film, in the original film. And so the overall point I'm trying to make is the quality was poor of the initial movie, 50 Shades of Grey. It was just not a good movie. That being said, there is this huge built-in audience for it, so they went to go see it the opening weekend. You know, this film did $85 million opening weekend. The first one, 50 Shades of Grey, which opened last year on February 13th, right? Remember that date. So Valentine's Day, actually it was 2 years ago, 2015, Valentine's Day has become a big movie-going holiday. Not that it wasn't really before in the last couple of years, but something happened in the last few years where it just became a weekend to release an event film. So we had 50 Shades of Grey in 2015. This last year, 2016, we had Deadpool, which did, $130 million opening weekend, which blew everybody's mind. I had egg on my face on that one. I thought it was going to do like $30 million opening. I was like, there's no way this is going to connect with this many people, but it blew it out of the water. So Valentine's Day is now a movie going holiday. And I think it will be for, at least the next, decade or so. They're going to start releasing bigger films on the mid-February. In any event, the original 50 Shades of Grey popped off that holiday weekend, had a huge built-in audience. There's just this huge buzz around the film. Everybody wanted to see it. I was living in New York City at the time. I was actually just about to move out, and there were subway ads everywhere. You just almost like kind of feel it in the air that people wanted to see this movie and people were talking about it. So it popped off at $85 million. Its second weekend dropped off the face of the earth with only 22 million, dropping 74%. People, I think, weren't that surprised by that drop, but you see why it happened. It was incredibly front-loaded because of the built-in audience, because of the buzz, and then that drop-off was so severe because the audience for this film was limited, right? Everybody who wanted to go see it saw it the first opening weekend, and there just wasn't a lot of new people to go see it who hadn't seen it in the first weekend. So that's why you get a drop like that. It's like a confluence of a lot of different things, and on top of that, like I said before, the movie was shitty, but this second one has done okay. Like it's 55% drop is not that bad comparatively. Now, if you wanted to compare this to the rest of the general wide opening of films, 55% of your second weekend, not so great. But I think 50 Shades Darker might be playing a little bit better than the original, if I'm so bold as to say that. It has a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics. 9%, folks. Its audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 59%. People hated this film, so I don't know what's happening. Maybe it's because Valentine's Day was on the weekend 2 years ago, and this year it was in the middle of the week. I think it was like Wednesday or something. So I wouldn't know. I didn't go on a date or like that. Not to get into my love life, but I will. That's a whole nother podcast. Any event, so this is kind of confounding when you think about it. So if you look at the pattern is that it should have had a 60-70% drop because it should be super front loaded, but it wasn't. And it wasn't necessarily that the quality of the film was better. It might have actually been worse compared to what I've heard from people. It's one of the worst films they've seen ever. This second one, 50 Shades Darker, and the first one was also awful. So I can only imagine how bad this one would have to be in order to be worse than the original. So it's not necessarily the quality should have dropped it lower. So it may have just been the timing of Valentine's Day that let this one sort of carry on through this weekend. In any event, 50 Shades Darker came in at $21 million this weekend. Its per theater average is still a great for a second weekend of a film like this, $5,600 per theater. That's not bad. It's at the $89 million mark, pretty much $90 million. No idea where this one's going to go. Who knows what this is going to end up at? Its multiplier, I can guarantee you, will be under 3. I'll bet you $1 million it's under 3. But the performance, I think overall, I think Universal's going to be happy with this. I think they wanted it to open a lot more than it did, closer to that 80 million or 85 million of the original. But I think they're just happy to get their money on this one. They're happy to get, I don't know, like a $30-40 million profit at the end of the day on this. They're essentially printing money. They wanted to print $80 million, but that's not going to happen, of course. So 50 Shades Darker was number 2. On to number 3, The Great Wall. This is the Matt Damon historical film, I guess you'd call it. I don't really know that much about it. It's an action film. I do know that this is a big co-production with a Chinese firm, I believe. I don't really have a lot of details on that. It opened overseas in China last year, I believe last December. And so I guess this is like a weird new experiment they're doing where it's like, hey, let's make a movie that's, co-funded by a Chinese company. Maybe it'll play really well in China. It's not XXX, so it's probably not going to play that well. I can't get over how well XXX is playing in China. It's just like blowing my mind. In any event, it did not do that well here in the States. I think most people could see this coming. The Great Wall did about $18 million this weekend. It was on 3,300 screens. Its per theater average was an okay $5,400 per theater. Its budget was $150 million. Again, the finances on this are so confusing because it was co-produced by a Chinese company, so it doesn't really follow the normal rules. If this was a normal wide release action film that did $18 million on its opening weekend and its budget was $150, you're looking at a huge flop, like a flop that will lose $50 to $100 million in that range. So normally this would be a big flop, but I think they just wanted to squeeze what they could get out of the domestic market while relying much more on the international market for this one to make money. In any event, it did okay. It's going to fall at the face of the earth. I kind of wonder, I didn't see what critics said about this one. Really bad reviews, 35% in Rotten Tomatoes overall. Audience score is terrible, 54%. So this is going nowhere. Like this is, it's at $18 million now. It's not, it might get a 3x multiplier because it's kind of an interesting film. It's one of those films that they made a lot more of these in the 80s and 90s, like action adventure, and they sort of dropped out the face of the earth in the early 2000s. And this decade too, it's just sort of like, man, it's just not going on. So, if it does the 3x multiplier, which I could see because it is kind of unique, you're going to look at $54 million total take. I don't know if they're going to be happy with it. I can't see them being happy with that. I can't see how they would be happy with that. I think they wanted it to pop off in the mid-20s at least. I think the executives, when they were pitching it like probably 4 or 5 years ago, they're like, oh, this will open to $50 million easy, maybe even higher, who knows. And I think along the way it just sort of lost its spark and hook. Like the people who want to see this movie are like my dad. Like my dad is in his late 60s. He grew up like with the big adventure movies of the 70s and 80s. That's the 1970s and 80s. And this is something that he would be like, oh, look, that looks interesting. That's the type of person who's going to see that. And there's not that many people like that anymore who go to see movies. You got to remember that the largest group of people per capita that is going to movies, the biggest sort of chunk of people that you can get a hold of are young people. It's 12 to 17. It's teenagers. They have enough disposable income where they can afford to go to a movie, and they go to movies constantly, much more than older people over 50, over 65. Is the Great Wall going to play to a group like that? Absolutely not. It's not going to play to a group like that at all. Again, 30 years ago, it could. I was a teenager back in the 1990s. And I would absolutely have gone to see this on a weekday or Saturday afternoon. That's what I did with my life. I went to movies all the time. Do teenagers nowadays have an attraction to an action adventure movie like this? No, not unless it's Furious 7 or whatever, unless Vin Diesel's involved. Don't even think about it. But in any event, it was an interesting project that they did here with the co-financing. I kind of want to keep a track of this film just to see in Variety or Hollywood Reporter if they ever release sort of if it was profitable or not. I want to see if this gamble, this kind of new way of producing films, paid off. But in America, it's not doing well at all. $18 million on opening weekend. Just based on that, it's a huge flop. Coming in number 4 this weekend was John Wick Chapter 2, 16.5 million, a 46% drop, which seems high for a film like this. And I'll tell you why in a minute. 3,100 screens, $5,300 per theater this weekend, just about at the $16 million mark. Couple of things about John Wick are so fascinating. I actually got to go back to my notes for the show that I did not record and see what I said it was going to do. I was actually really close on predicting this one on its opening weekend. So the original, I believe, only did about $14 million its opening weekend, which was not great, right? The opening weekend for John Wick 2 was at $30.4 million. I had guessed $29 million, and I was kind of an outlier. Variety had guessed 19 million, Box Office Pro mid-20s, Deadline said low 20s, LA Times said 22. So I was, among the industry people, I was a lot closer than they were at $29 million, but that had even outperformed that. And the reason I knew this was going to happen, and I knew it was going to happen, was that John Wick, the original, came out of nowhere. Came absolutely out of nowhere. Keanu Reeves is this odd actor who has had such an interesting career. He is probably most well known for his action work in The Matrix and earlier than that, Speed. But he's had kind of a checkered career, I think you could say. He hasn't done... Outside of John Wick, I'm looking back at what he's done recently. He was in a couple of just huge flops. Before John Wick, he was in 47 Ronin, disaster. A couple of really small indie films. The Day the Earth Stood Still was probably his last, before John Wick, his last bigger film that he was in. Also a big flop. And wow, I mean, he just didn't do anything in the 2000s outside of the Matrix stuff. Now, honestly, the Matrix stuff was huge, but the Matrix was from 99 till 2003. After 2003, he just sort of, I don't want to say disappeared. He just was not in a film that was a home run. Any film that he was in, The Lake House, Scanner Darkly, not necessarily the worst films in the world, but they were not either financial huge successes or cultural successes. When John Wick came out, he was long overdue for a hit, because I think Keanu Reeves is highly respected as an actor, especially in the weird Reddit online Chan nerd world. He's apparently an incredibly nice person, very generous. And there was, a few memes going on. Sad Keanu was the, great one from probably like 10 years ago. Just absolutely hilarious. And, so he's been in the public consciousness, but had not been in a really interesting, good film in a long time. And then John Wick comes along in October of 2014, and it's kind of a sleeper, right? It opens only at 14. I had no interest in seeing it. I heard it was like, oh, this guy's dog gets killed and he goes on like a revenge killing spree. That's kind of cool. That's kind of interesting. Kind of a weird like story, right? Really simple to the point of absurdity. It ended up doing $43 million domestically, a nice 3x multiplier. That basically means that like it didn't pop off on opening weekend, but people sort of found it a little bit later. I didn't find it at all until like a year later, when my friend was like, not even a year later, like 6 months later, my friend was ranting about it at brunch. She was just like, at brunch. Yeah, I go to brunch, people. Love brunch. It's the greatest meal ever invented. He just ranted for like an hour about it. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's like, and I trust this guy's opinion. And he was all up in it. And I was like, man, like I got to check out this movie, because just him describing it was like, this sounds awesome. And then when you finally sit down and watch it, you're like, holy fucking shit, this movie rocks. Like if you like action movies that are well produced and kind of flashy, but subtle at the same time, flashy in the right moments and subtle in the right moments. This movie is it's one of the best action movies made in the last, I want to say 20 years. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a big action movie fan. I like watched every single action movie that came out in the 90s. 2000s, not as much, but I can tell you John Wick is going to be a classic. It's going to be a classic. And the second one, it didn't do that well in the box office, but it gained this huge cult status online afterwards. Like the number of Reddit posts on the R Movies subreddit about John Wick, probably more than any other movie of the last couple of years. So I expected it really to pop off. And that's how I knew it was going to pop off. John Wick 2, Chapter 2 was going to pop off last weekend. And what's interesting too is that the quality of the film seems incredibly high. 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, 90% for an action movie, 90%, 91% audience score. People love this movie. I got to check out the cinema score here, and so it's got A minus cinema score. Fantastic, really good. What is kind of odd to me on this one is 45% seems kind of like a high drop for that situation. I think what happened here is that you had a lot of fanboy people. Fanboys, obviously someone who's super into the series or the brand or whatever. They had to go see this opening weekend. Everybody came out to see it. The second weekend, it's just a little bit less, a little bit less than I would like to see. With that quality, the quality that I'm seeing on Rotten Tomatoes and those audience scores and cinema score, I would like to see something in the low 40s or ideally in the high 30s. And it didn't hit it. 45%, basically 46% drop, which is a pretty average drop. I just wish this film would do a little bit better, but it's that weird sort of is online reality. Like that was a big thing, a big argument about a decade ago. And I always go back to Snakes on a Plane. And I think I probably talked about this 1,000 times. For you people who were not into the box office 10 years ago when Snakes on a Plane came out, Snakes on a Plane was, I forget how it got so popular. It basically became a huge meme before it came out. And I remember a time when people didn't use the word meme. It wasn't really called a meme back then, I don't think. It was just like a weird cult thing where people were like, this sounds hilarious, and let's let everybody joked about it online for a long time. And, all the big industry people were like, oh, what's going on with these youngsters and their jokes about this movie? It's not even out yet. They hadn't seen that before, the industry. And so they're like, this is weird. Let's throw it out there and do a big release in August of whatever, 2006, 2007. I can't remember what it was. And just like, it's like like did okay, but like totally kind of flopped after that. So it was like a huge failed experiment on like trying to translate online buzz into real cash. Nowadays, of course, that's the norm. Like we live in a world where online has kind of become our reality. And so, you know, something like John Wick 2, the only reason it was made is because of online buzz. You know, that's it. Like if it had done what if you were just taking its box office return for the first one, you'd be like, we're not going to make a sequel. Why would we? It didn't make that much money. But they saw the buzz, they responded to it, and now they're making a good reward. It's $58 million already. The first one did 43 total. You know, I think John Wick 2 is going to end up at, I'm going to say at least 2.8 multiplier. It's going to end up at like, you know, probably $75-80 million total. At least. So I think it was a good gamble by Lionsgate, and it really paid off. And it was one of those instances where a movie found an audience after its theatrical release because of that buzz through the VOD and DVD and Netflix streaming stuff. They decided, you know, they greenlit a sequel, and it really paid off well here. So John Wick 2 Chapter 2 coming at 16.5 million. Gonna do really well, I think. Overall, big win for Keanu there. I hope they do a third because the quality of this second one looked like it was really high. All right, coming at number 5 this weekend, President's Day weekend, Fist Fight, $12 million on about 3,200 screens. Its per theater average was not great, about $3,800 per theater. Not a lot to say about this one. I saw the trailer. I was like, all right, Charlie Day, Ice Cube, Tracy Morgan. I was like, this could do really well. And a lot of people on the forum, the sort of box office forums, were like, well, there hasn't been a big comedy in a long time. So I think this is going to play well. That's a rated R comedy. I remember when I had a really long rant about rated R comedies like 2 months ago. I love that rant. It was a good rant. All about basically how old school is like the foundation of rated R comedy, modern rated R comedy. This one just didn't connect with audiences. I'm not sure why. Let's take a look at the quality here real quick. 32% around Tomatoes from critics, 57% from the audience. That's not good. I think when I saw the trailer of this, I was just like, all right, like Ice Cube is gonna yell a lot like he did in the 21 Jump Street movies. He's gonna yell a lot, kind of be a dick, and Charlie Day is gonna play his very peckish, meekish, anxiety, neurotic prone kind of nerd. It doesn't seem that interesting to me, and the rest of the people in this country didn't think so either. So it only came in at $12,000 for the weekend, or sorry, $12 million for the weekend. I don't think they're gonna be very happy with that. I think they expected high teens on this. I would expect high teens if I'm gonna put, you know, that much money into it. Now people are saying like the production was pretty low, but that doesn't. Sometimes you have to throw out what the budget is, because it's like you gotta perform. If you're gonna do a wide release, you gotta perform, and this movie's not performing. So, okay, it's going to break even. The point is not to break even. The point is to make a ton of money in this industry. It's about profit. It's not about breaking even. Breaking even is what a loser does in this situation. And now they're just praying that this thing breaks even because it's a loser of a movie. It's not going to go anywhere. I have no idea how good it is. I'm like pissing all over this movie, not to use a strange presidential term. But it just didn't connect with anybody, and it's kind of a failure. Might find some life on VOD and Netflix and streaming, but I doubt it. Coming at number 6, Hidden Figures, the movie that will not go away. $7.1 million, an unbelievable 11% drop. I just love this. I love the story of this movie so much. It's kind of outrageous when you think about it. It's unbelievable how well it's doing. It's at $142 million. It's been out for 9 weekends. It's just fantastic. It's starting to drop some theaters. It's only at 2,200, dropped about 500 theaters from last weekend. So how does that work? It drops 500 theaters, but only goes down 11%. That doesn't make any sense. Like, these drops are outrageous. It's still at a $3,200 per theater average. I don't know if it could be the spoiler at the Oscars. I'm just throwing it out. The Oscars are next weekend. If you got some extra cash, can you legally bet on the Oscars? I'm sure you can somewhere. In most of America, we're so anti-gambling, but you go to Vegas and it's like whatever, or you go to Europe and it's like whatever, you can bet anything you want. put some money on Hidden Figures for me. Split it between me and you. You get a half, I get a half. I'm just telling you right now, insider track, Hidden Figures could pull off a huge upset. There's something magical about this film. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen it yet. The marketing campaign for this, whoever did it needs to be the president of marketing at Fox, because it was so well done across the board. And people are in love with the film. I could gush about it for hours. I've never seen it. I don't know if I'm ever going to see it. Just from a business marketing perspective, huge grand slam for Fox with Hidden Figures. Fantastic stuff. Speaking of grand slams, Split came in at number 7 this weekend. Only $70 million, pretty good. 26% drop. Another great drop. Look at these sub 30 drops. It's nuts. Sub 30 drop, and it lost 500 theaters. Explain that. I mean, it makes sense. These films are just there's something connecting with people on such a deep level. Its per theater average was just shy of $3,000. Split's take overall now is $123 million. No one expected this. Let me give you the budget on this was $9 million for Split. $9 million was the production budget. Now, okay, you're gonna say, well, the marketing was at least $40 million. I'm not gonna argue with that. The marketing for this was a normal wide release, 3,000 screen release. So you're talking 40, 45 million, maybe $50 million for marketing. Whatever, throw it out the door. A $9 million production budget for a movie doing $123 million domestically right now, that's gonna make it up to what? 140s, 150 might be a stretch. But this is a huge home run for M. Night Shyamalan and Universal. I think I saw the film opening weekend. I absolutely hated it. I thought it was trashy. I thought it was so overwrought and overcooked. I thought the acting was hammy. But I will say, I have a lot of film nerd friends who saw it. They said it was riveting. One of my friends said it was riveting. I could see that, right? For me, it's just like when you're doing psychological horror and a thriller, it's really fragile. And if you don't play your cards right and don't hit the right notes at the right time, it comes across really like a episode of Baywatch Nights or like a Lifetime movie. It comes across as super cheesy and lame. And I just felt the Split was like that, but like really well produced. It was like a really well produced, lame thriller. But my opinion doesn't matter when it comes down to the business of this, because people have loved Split and they are all in on it. And they're just gonna keep seeing it. It's outrageous how well it's doing. But I'm despite the fact that I didn't like the film at all and actually hated it, I'm happy for M. Night Shyamalan, because I think his first 4 films are all near masterpieces of American film. And yeah, sure, I'm a fanboy, whatever. Like and going back to those films is like just such a pleasure. Like Sixth Sense, any of them. I went on about M. Night Shyamalan a few episodes back for like an hour. I think he's fantastic. So I hope that the success of Split helps him get back into the game, maybe get back into the groove so he can make some really good films again. But whatever. Split's doing fantastic. My opinion of its artistic qualities don't really count when it comes down to how much money it makes. So in the event, Split was number 7, $7 million. Number 8 was A Dog's Purpose, $5.6 million. Great drop, 23% drop, even while losing 600 theaters. Per theater average is getting close to let's get rid of it. It's approaching $2,300 per theater. Only $50 million take so far. Low budget, $22 million budget. But again, this thing was like saddled with the whole PETA controversy. And, it's done okay despite that. I thought this movie was going to do a lot better than this. I thought it was going to open in the $30 million range. That was before the PETA video stuff came out. It's not even a PETA video. It's like somebody on set just like did this cell phone video and released it. And look, there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. TMZ made a lot of money off ad revenue by playing the video over and over again and getting clicks. A rival studio from Universal probably loved the fact that it came out because it depressed the movie's numbers. I'm not trying to say I don't care about animals or animal well-being, but there's always alternative motivations going on with this sort of stuff. And it seemed like a very strange, why would you release it a few days before the movie comes out or a couple of weeks? Why wouldn't you release it when you first shot it like a couple of years ago? Just seemed really sketchy. In any event, it did hurt this film, the controversy. And so it's only gonna, who knows, it's gonna end up for like $60-something million. Not what they wanted to see on this. Not a huge loss per se, but like I felt like the film had the possibility of being a big hit, like maybe even hitting like the $80 million, $100 million range. Wishful thinking, perhaps. And number 9 this weekend was La La Land, 4.5 million. The best drop of the weekend, only 9% drop, despite losing about 500 theaters. Its per theater average is $2,800 per theater. Its total take so far is $133 million. I've talked about this film at length for at least the last 3 months. What's there more to say about La La Land? I mean, we'll see how it does next week at the Oscars. It basically swept the Golden Globes. The Oscars is a little bit tougher than the Golden Globes. I don't know how. I do see it winning Best Director and Best Film. I think Best Actor and Best Actress will be a little bit harder. I do feel like there's an outside chance that Hidden Figures or something like that, Moonlight should win. I saw Moonlight a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, and it's absolute masterpiece. Easily one of the best films I've seen in the last few years. Just beautiful film. I think artistically it's much better than La La Land. But La La Land has the buzz. It has the money. It made $130 million. Moonlight made $21 million at the box office. So totally different stories. Moonlight's an art film. La La Land is kind of an art film, kind of a bigger musical masquerading as an art film. I think that one of the reasons it got so much buzz was the fact that it was kind of like old Hollywood, like an old Hollywood musical style. But that, I don't know, it got like some weird hipster buzz from it. I'm certainly was part of that, without a doubt. Like, I talked up La La Land incessantly before it came out, because I was like, oh, this Ryan Gosling, Emma Stone, it's going to be so wonderful. I didn't think it was a good film. It was certainly not a great film. There were some huge problems with it, but it's super enjoyable. I love the fact that it harkens back to the past. Just artistic quality wise, there's no way you could even put it up against Moonlight. Moonlight's so much better, and I'm sure Manchester by the Sea is better. I haven't seen it yet, but I can tell it's probably better. But I think La La Land's gonna win, probably gonna win everything, just because it has the buzz right now, and its box office is fantastic. $133 million. Nobody thought that was gonna happen. No one thought it was gonna break $100 million at all, or even come close, to be honest with you. So rounding out the top 10 this week, A Cure for Wellness. I got this film so wrong. I invested in this film on Hollywood Stock Exchange the moment I saw the trailer, and I saw that it was Gore Verbinski, who did The Ring, and he did obviously Pirates of the Caribbean. So a well-seasoned sort of horror director, proves that he can create a very compelling high-budget horror movie. It's a $40 million budget for horror movies. Nothing. It's nothing to what's the saying? Nothing to blink at. Nothing to whatever. It's a lot. It's a lot for a horror film. Perhaps too much in this case. It only came in at $4.2 million for the weekend. 2,700 screens. Its per theater average, this is so sad, $1,500 on an opening weekend for a huge wide release horror film from Fox. I believe they did two 30-second Super Bowl spots. One of those 30-second Super Bowl spots cost more than this movie took in the entire weekend. I think it was $5.5 billion for a 30-second spot. This is a huge flop, and I feel bad for whoever was involved with it. I don't know about the quality of the film. I'll look it up on Rotten Tomatoes now and see what people were thinking. But it looks super fascinating. The first trailer was awesome. You had no idea what was going on. It just reminded me a lot of BioShock and that whole world, like that weird, kind of felt like turn of the 19th to the 20th century, early 20th century, like the whole wellness movement. Which if you're not like a history buff, it's just like in the early 20th century, there's this sort of rise of like health spas, and like I think it was just like a new way of thinking about human health. And it had like this really weird, creepy side to it. And like movies in the past have been, not just movies, but like a video game like BioShock was able to really tap into that, the oddity of it. And this movie looked like tailor-made for that audience. And it just did not connect with anybody, sadly. Even with those 2 Super Bowl spots, you think it could at least do $10 million. Unfortunately, this is a massive flop for Fox, and I feel bad for Gore Verbinski too. I know people kind of like shit all over him, but you know, like he hasn't had I feel really bad for him now that I'm looking at it. I forgot he did The Lone Ranger back in 2013, which is one of the biggest bombs, I believe, of all time. That ended up with $89 million. Its production budget was $215. Total releasing costs on that are probably well over $500 million, maybe in the $600 million range. Like, that's probably a massive $150 million loss for that movie. I think Verbinski is going to have, I don't know. I guess he's probably doing the new Pirates movies, I would hope. He did the last 3, I guess. Which did really well. I mean, this movie's made $300 million, $400 million, another $300 million. So, like, obviously, Gore Verbinski has proven himself as a blockbuster director. It's just he has had 1, 2, 3 real big misses in a row, and the big budget people, they keep you on a short list. I think a short leash. And if you keep hitting home runs, keep doing $200 million, $300 million blockbusters, and you're crushing it, they're like, you're the greatest person in the world. You do 3 flops like this in a row, you're basically dead to them. And so we'll see what's gonna end up for Gore Verbinski in the future. But this Cure for Wellness was quite the disaster at the box office. In any event, that rounds out the top 10. I'm gonna try and I'll try and do this next week, and like I said before, like it's I'll try and do a show a week. I'm not gonna be able to keep up the 2 a week doing a review and projections. Just not gonna happen. I don't have the time these days. Well, I'll just do a quick little teaser for what's coming out next weekend. Collide. I don't know anything about that. Felicity Jones, Anthony Hopkins, Ben Kingsley. What is this? It's Open Road Films, so it's total trash. It'll bomb. Open Road Films doesn't know how to release films. It's unbelievable. I don't know what they're doing. The one that I really want to keep an eye on is Get Out, sort of racially charged horror film about a young white woman and a young black man who are dating. He goes back to visit the family in like this super white Stepford Wives suburb, and it ends up being a crazy like horror film about him being trapped there with these white people trying to, I guess, enslave him. It's like there's so many fucking layers to this thing, especially nowadays with what's going on in America. Like I really expect Get Out to do quite well. It's opening on 27 screens from Universal this weekend or next weekend. Then Rock Dog. I don't even know what the hell this is. Luke Wilson voiced Eddie Izzard, J.K. Simmons, Lewis Black. I don't know anything about this film whatsoever. It's Lionsgate Summit. It's not going to do very well, is it? So the big one to watch this weekend, I think, is definitely going to be Get Out. Is it going to break out or not? I get the feeling in my stomach and my gut that it's going to break out, but we don't know. Anyway, this has been the Wildline Podcast. I've been your host, Dan. I'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.